Hi there. As somebody asked on Patreon how I rendered my particles from my last tutorial, I thought I quickly go over my render setup. So what you see here is my rendered result, and as you might have expected, I rendered this with Redshift. And that is just due to the fact that I only have one machine here at home, and Redshift is quite a bit faster than Mantra. But a Mantra setup would look quite similar. So let's close the IPR for now and quickly look at the scene. I have three objects here, the particles and the OBJ that we created in the last tutorial. And then I created this seamless here. And that is just a subdivided box, basically. It's just to have a background in my scene. Then I created this light dome, this RS light dome, and I used the texture from SIBL. I put the link in the description of the video where you can download this old industrial hall HDR. It is for free, but of course it's copyrighted, so I unfortunately cannot include it with the tutorial, but you can download it and use it if you want. And that is there for reflections mainly. It has these windows here at the top, and that gives some nice reflections. And then I added a RS area light to boost the lighting a little bit. This area light sits here and just lights the object from the left, giving nice hard shadows. And this light is responsible for the shading of the particles, basically, such that we have a light side and a dark side and clearly see what happens. With the particles, remember that inside of the .NET, I set CD with this ramp here. So I have this ramp and it sets CD from age. That means the particles have a different color if they're very young, just born, and the older they get, the lighter they get. This information is used in shading. And as it is bound to an attribute, I can access it from shading. So let's quickly switch to the matte context. And here I have a shader for particles. That is a RS swapnet. And inside I have a RS material. This is just a standard RS material. The color is gray because it resembles exactly the color from the surface shader of the object. And the only change I made is to set the weight of the reflection to 0 because this is a matte object, so the particles should be matte too. And now I bring in the CD attribute from the particles through the particle attribute lookup node. So you can access this by typing point, RS point attribute, that is this node. And then you can put the attribute in here that should be red. And in our case it is CD. Now I pipe this black to white gradient through this color ramp here. And very important, especially with old builds of Redshift, is that you set the source of the ramp to alt. That means that you are using whatever comes in. By default, it is set to UV map. In newer builds, they changed that, I think, but with older builds, this is set to UV map, and that would use the UV information for shading and not the incoming color. So with this set to source, it is remapping the colors, and I remap the colors to a very light yellow here, where the particles are black, and then as soon as they get older, they turn black. And I pipe all of this into emission color. So if you go here to overall, you see that I set an emission weight of 2, but I'm controlling the emission through the color. That means where it is yellow, the particles are emissive. Everywhere else, they are just black, so they don't emit light. And that is because I want them to blend with the rim that I intend to shade in a similar fashion. So let's quickly look at the particles. If I turn off the other objects, and of course I applied the material here under render material, you see, if I open up the render view, the particles are colored gray, but where they are born, they are yellow to blend better with the object. Okay, next is the object itself, and I just fetched this object here from my setup. So the object is created here, but then it is turned into points here with a scatter node. So before doing that, I just pipe it out and put it in a different object. But I use this animate node here to create color on the object. I create a density value, and then I created more color. I created a new bind node and bound a new attribute called color and fed in just the gradient. If I quickly connect this to CD, you see what this is. This is our basic noise, black and white. I bound it to color instead of CD because in the first place I thought of using different color gradients, but then I found that one color gradient is enough. So you can use CD if you want. So by binding this to an attribute, I can access it from the shading context. So let's go to the shading context again. And in the shading context, I have this OBJ shader. It is basically using a roughness texture. So this is just a texture that I unfortunately cannot provide because it is from textures.com, where we have a membership. But you can use pretty much any grayscale image that gives nice results. And I use a triplanar node because I did not bother to create UVs for this blob of object. And the triplanar node just maps the texture seamlessly from all three directions. Basically a very quick way of texturing an object without visible seams. And then I created three materials in this case. I have this bronze material, that is a basic material. Then I have the gray material, and on top of everything I have this glow material. And I use the material blender node to blend between these three materials. The material blender is basically working like Photoshop layers. So you can layer materials and then you have these blend colors taking in a black and white color that tells the layer where it is transparent and where it is opaque. So let's again open up the render view. This is how the object looks. So it is using the color information from the SOP level. And if we quickly connect the bronze to the surface output, you see this is a basic material. So that is the bottommost layer. On top of that, I use this gray material. If I connect it quickly, you see this is the gray material that I use. And for the rim, I use this glow material. And if I blend everything together, it looks like this. So, very quick overview. The bronze material is set to metalness, and the metalness is set to 1. And then I just put in a color for the diffuse color. And if metalness is set to 1, this diffuse color is the specular color of the metal, basically, because everything is using the metal shader. For the gray material, I just took the same gray color as with the particles, and I just removed the reflection by setting the weight to 0, because this should be a very matte material. And then I just created a bump map from the same triplanar mapped texture and fed it to the overall bump port of this gray material. This gives the surface structure. And the glow is just emissive material. And all the fun comes from this particle attribute lookup. This does not only work with particles, and I think they renamed it by now. I'm using an old build here, but it used to be called particle attribute lookup, but it works for points too. And here I changed the attribute name to color, because that is the attribute that I used in SOPs. And then I feed this to two ramps. Again, both are set to alt. The first ramp is controlling the gray blend, and the second ramp is controlling this rim here. And the first ramp is just set to a very strong contrast here. And by moving these knots, you can control where exactly the blend starts, as you can see, and where it stops. So by controlling this gradient, you can exactly move your gray material to exactly where it has to be. And then with the second ramp, it's exactly the same. It's just that I created this peak here because I want the yellow to show only at the rim. And again, you can control where exactly it shows up and how thick it is by just using this. So now, if we turn on the particles again and the seamless and simulate them a little. Oh, I think I forgot to make the popnet visible again. So let's do this now. And let's simulate up to, say, frame 90 or something. 75 is enough. You can see that is everything together. So it's basically a cheap fake. We have this basic material that has a yellow rim, and then we have yellow particles, and it looks as if this rim is glowing and the particles are emitting from there, giving the illusion as if the particles were the paint layer that is removed from the object. That was the shaders, but there's one more thing, because I don't want to create real geometry for the particles. Instead, I want to have geometry created on render time, because that saves memory and is faster. And I can do that by just going to the Redshift Object tab of the Particles object, and then to Particles, and checking Render Object as Particles. And that will create spheres for the particles on render time. It's a lot like a Mantra render time procedural. The global scale multiplier allows you to scale the particles, although it's taking p-scale into account. But in my case, p-scale is set correctly, so I keep this to 1. So that is the render setup. The scene file is included with this tutorial just beneath the video. I hope this helps, and stay tuned for part 2 of the particles course.